Hello, I will be presenting to you an update on the ISA's data management strategy. I am Sheldon Carter, the database manager at the International Seabed Authority. The idea behind the ISA's database management strategy was started in July 2015, and it was recorded, or the need for it was recorded in the document ISBA 21 C16 in paragraph 36, where it stated that the authority should create a database management strategy, and the strategy should manage the data usage and confidentiality classification of all the data from contractors. It also stated that the data management strategy was of high priority as it relates to the exploitation regulation, and a working group was to be convened no later than February 2016. From this group, there was then an audit done to try and evaluate the current data management system that was in place within the Secretariat. The major findings of this audit was that data was mainly stored in a secured vault. Some data was stored on the authority's website, others on the Commission secured website. Then there was a standalone geographic information, or GIS system, that had some shape files and spatial data. Then there was a standalone computer software system that had some biological and environmental data. Everything was totally separate, and there was no interconnectivity between any of the components, and none of which spoke to one another, none of which could connect to each other and do any form of correlation. Well, definitely not the vault. So there was no link between all four, as I just stated. Uploading to the server was a manual process, and basic archiving functionality was being performed manually. This was not something that was sustainable, and with the number of contracts increasing rapidly, the Secretariat had to take advantage of digital technology and the efficiencies associated with going digital. As such, the ISA developed what is called deep data. Deep data was launched in July 2019. Now, what deep data represented was a georeference database management system that did file management, structured data, and also was able to query information and make environmental data publicly available to you all. However, it must be noted that deep data within itself and the launch of deep data was not the data management strategy. The data management strategy was much larger, and deep data represented one component of the strategy, while it was interconnected with many other aspects of the strategy. There was a lot more to include or to manage data that comes into the Secretariat. During the launch, we spoke of the history of ISA's data. So for instance, when I arrived at the ISA and I started looking at the data that was available, I was shocked to find that some of the data was actually older than I am. And then when I went into the vault that was mentioned earlier, I found some floppy disks. What was even more surprising to me was when I actually found some 5 1/4 floppy disks that we were required to extract information from. Now, a lot of this data might have been from pioneer contractors and so forth, but it made me realize that this data was huge, and the magnitude of data, the historic nature of the data, and the value of this data was, I would say, unthinkable. Therefore, the deep data system and the database had to also create a strategy as to how it would incorporate and how it would upload historic data as we went back. What we knew was that the primary tool for loading or uploading data was actually the reporting templates that were found on the ISA's website. But we have to now find a way of how to retrofit the system, so to speak, that it could incorporate some of this historic data. Where possible, we had to also digitize the data that was available and try to make it something that was queryable in a structured format. In some instances, we had to just simply scan the documents and upload them to the system while maintaining the relevant confidentiality status. So having said that, let's now look at the actual data management strategy itself. The data management strategy is being designed with 5 major components. We need to identify data, we need to provision data, we need to store data, we need to process and integrate data, and finally, we need to have a component related to data governance. So what do I mean by identifying data? It is essentially being able to classify and catalog all the data that's coming into the Secretariat, being able to appropriately assign, for instance, even confidentiality status once you get it, being able to validate the type of data, validate the use, create some form of standards that when I get certain data, it is this form of data. When I get coordinates, it's this form of coordinates. So it's just being able to know what you have, essentially. Then you go into storing data, where the deep data database is a huge part. So what's involved in this? It's identifying the appropriate software infrastructure. It is also creating a scalable database management system. It's creating a process or procedure for data submission. It's managing the geodatabase, maintenance of the reporting template, creating things like the ETL process, the website associated with it, access control. All of that information, it falls under storage. Then we move into provisioning the data. So now we are dealing with access to the data, persons being able to query and connect to the data and being able to make use of this data somewhat. Then we look at processing the data. Having connected to the data, we now need to create some form of data products. We need to do some data integration. So we're now connecting different data sets. We're creating standardized formats. We're actually also now looking to adapt what I'd call some of the best practice and some formats that are out there. We're now looking to use QA QC procedures. For instance, we're looking to validate or verify some of the taxonomic data with systems such as worms. We're also looking to integrate the ISA's database with other such database. For instance, we're looking to integrate ISA's database with perhaps even the OBIS database. So that is also another aspect of processing and integration of data. Then finally, we come to data governance. And this has to do with the licensing of data, creating the DOIs, creating the appropriate policies, creating archiving policies, a security framework, the disaster recovery framework, for instance, even the IT business continuity plan as it relates to the data system, ensuring that you have all the relevant redundancy, a change management protocol for the database, all of that. For instance, even just contractors. Let's say a contractor wants to update a data set. Then what is the policy and how do they go ahead with making that update? Let's say members of the scientific community has downloaded a data set. For the DOI and the CC, how do they reference this data? How do they attribute who are the owners of the data? So the ISA has an interesting setup. So let me describe it somewhat. So the ISA requires for contractors to submit data related to their exploration. These contractors then, perhaps in some instances, engage external entities. So let's say academic institutions or research institutions that have scientists behind it. Now, let's say a discovery is made or something of scientific relevance has been presented or discovered. Who is the owner of it? Is it the scientists who actually made the discovery? Is it the institution or the contractor that had commissioned it? Is it the Secretariat or better yet, the authority who owns this data now? How should the license be created? How should referencing be done? So that is a question that will be answered under this section of the data management strategy. And finally, we look at the timelines for the data management strategy. So we're currently in September, and you are all a part of this data management workshop where we've had two parts of the workshop thus far. So we had meetings with the Legal and Technical Commission, we had meetings with the contractors, and now we're having meetings with the other stakeholders. So yourself, the members of the scientific community, government entities, and so forth. So we're having this public session to garner your feedback, your comments on the data management strategy, on the components of deep data itself, to then feed this into the workshop report. This workshop report will then feed into the draft data management strategy. Now, this draft data management strategy we expect to be completed by December. Having completed this draft strategy in December, we then move into drafting the relevant updates to the regulatory framework within the Secretariat. So we're drafting all the changes that may be necessary to the LTC documentation and to recommendations and guidelines for contractors. Having drafted that, we submit everything, both documents, to the members of the Legal and Technical Commission for their review during the February meeting. So the Commission will now be reviewing the updated legal documents along with the data management strategy document itself. Hopefully, once all of this is reviewed, we have a few months, and then in the July session, the expectation is that the data management strategy would have been approved by the other organs within the Secretariat and then passed on and made publicly available. With that, I thank you very much.